I've always loved steel hardtails. There's just something about their thin tubing, classic lines, and if done right, a ride feel that can't mimic any other material. But these days, it seems like a lot of steel bikes are coming from boutique small batch manufacturers, which can lead to a price tag that can be a little hard to justify. So you can only imagine how excited I was when I heard about State Bicycle Co.'s all-new 4130 Trail. A full 4130 chromoly hardtail that lists for just $1,499. So, is this finally the bike that can deliver steel is real performance for the masses? Or did State shoot themselves in the foot by trying to cut too many corners to keep the price tag low? Well, spoiler alert, it's complicated. Let's go ahead and start by talking about what really matters here, which is the frame. I say the frame is what really matters because you could get a much better spec'd aluminum hardtail for less than the cost of the 4130 Trail. So really, the frame is what you're paying for. It's constructed from double-butted 4130 chromoly tubing with a cast chainstay yoke. The super slim seat stays do have a small brace to help with lateral stiffness, and there's another equally minimal brace supporting the brake mounts. But thankfully, neither of these took away from the supple ride feel I was hoping to find. Now, despite the vintage looks, thankfully the 4130 Trail does have thoroughly modern standards, including boost through axles front and rear, UDH compatibility, ISCG tabs, and simple external cable routing, save for a dropper seat post. There's also a 3-pack of mounts on the down tube and a pair on the seat tube. Speaking of those seat tube mounts though, they do sadly go all the way through the frame, which means that seat post insertion on this guy is severely limited. On my medium/large frame, it was down to 220 millimeters. For reference, most full suspension bikes hit at least 250 mils for this size, and a lot of hardtails are 300 mils or more. And this of course interferes with dropper post insertion. Now, obviously on this guy, I'm running a rigid post, but even still, I couldn't lower the seat as much as I would have liked to on the descents. Another thing that might be a con to some is the straight untapered head tube. But to be honest, a lot of steel hardtails have this. Again, it kind of gives it that more vintage look, and the extra centimeter or so of stack height that results from the lower external headset cup is figured into the frame's geometry. So it's never bothered me. Speaking of geometry though, let's go ahead and talk about that next. The 4130 Trail has pretty traditional modern trail hardtail numbers. It's highlighted by a 65-degree head tube angle when paired with the stock 130mm fork. Reach numbers are on the shorter side of the spectrum, my medium-large measuring 465 millimeters. Countering this is a relatively slack 74.4-degree seat tube angle. This combination of a shorter reach and slacker seat tube angle is admittedly kind of out of vogue these days, but I don't mind it. When you're climbing, the seated position puts you in a more aggressive forward-leaning stance for challenging climbs and keeps the wheelbase nice and tight for fun technical moves, up or down the trail. Sure, it might not be best for an enduro bike, but for a fun-focused steel hardtail like the 4130 Trail, I think it works out pretty well. Adding to that agility and playfulness is a pretty dang short rear end, measuring just 427 millimeters across all 4 frame sizes. All sizes also come with 29-inch wheels front and rear, and there's no geometry adjustment to accommodate a smaller wheel in the back. All in all, I'd say that makes this frame almost perfect for riders looking for an affordable, fun hardtail. I say almost because, again, for me, the limited seat post insertion is definitely a big con. Before moving on to the component spec on this complete bike, it's worth noting that you can get a frame set, which includes the frame and this RockShox silo fork, for just $495. And honestly, that's an insanely good deal. It might even be good enough to motivate me to relearn how to ride before the advent of long travel dropper posts. Speaking of the fork, I was actually pretty impressed by the RockShox Silo Silver that was spec'd here. Yes, the 35mm steel stanchions are heavy, but the motion control damper provided a nice usable range of compression and rebound adjustment, and on the trail, it didn't feel far off from its pricier sibling, the Lyric. Another high point for me were the wheels and tires. The WTB I-30 rims have always performed well for me, and in this case, they were laced to some generic sealed bearing hubs, which had pretty low engagement, but were fuss-free during the month or so I spent on the bike. Wrapped around these are a pair of 2.4-inch WTB Trail Boss tires. For the group set, the 11-speed Microshift XLE drivetrain performed great as well. It was only on the steepest of climbs that I felt held back by the slightly narrower 11-48 tooth cassette, and shifts were smooth and reliable during my entire testing period. In my experience, the pawl and ratchet cassette that Microshift uses on their derailleurs can develop some play over time, and that can lead to increased chain noise and even some dropped chains, but I never experienced that while testing this bike. Another thing I appreciated were the short 165mm State branded cranks. I've been riding shorter cranks for years, and it's awesome to see more brands speccing them as an OEM part, especially on a more budget-friendly bike like the 4130 Trail. Speaking of in-house parts, you also get a cool retro-looking State branded top-load stem and some State bars, which are 770mm wide, which might be on the narrower end for some riders. Now, of course, it's not going to be all rainbows and butterflies for a $1,500 bike, and State definitely had to make some compromises to get it at that price tag. The first and most obvious one is the rigid seat post. Now, it's worth noting that you can add a dropper post at checkout for an additional $200, but just about any other hardtail at this price point will spec with one out the door. But of course, you can work around not having a dropper seat post by using a quick release seat post clamp. Something that can't be quite so easily remedied, however, are the brakes. The two-piston Tektro HD M275s weren't nearly powerful enough to handle the speed the 4130 Trail was capable of. You could eke out a bit more power by upgrading the 180mm rotors to something a bit larger and or using sintered pads. But to be honest, I would say that both of those are kind of band-aids before you're able to upgrade the brakes as a whole. Now, thankfully, this is another option that you can choose to add at checkout. You can go ahead and spec the bike with some SRAM DB8s, which I think would be a great match for this bike. Speaking of add-ons, I already mentioned that you can get a P&W dropper post while checking out, but you can also add a SRAM GX Axis drivetrain and even Envy AM30 wheels. But the stock bike alone, as it comes for that $1,500 price tag, will come in at 33 pounds or 15 kilograms, which honestly isn't too bad for a $1,500 steel hardtail. Now though, let's move on to how all that came together to feel on the trail. My first ride was on a rugged, hand-built trail high in the mountains, and the loose, chattery terrain was a great place to put the steel frame to the test. And yes, I'm happy to report that it does have that subtly muted, yet still high-strung feel. It's honestly hard to find on anything other than a steel bike. This is kind of hard to convey if you've never ridden one before, but an analogy that I like to use is it's kind of like you're running your tires with 5 or so PSI less than you usually would, at least when it comes to damping small bumps and trail chatter. This not only results in a more comfortable ride and better handling, but I've found it can also reduce fatigue on longer rides compared to an aluminum hardtail. I'll be honest that I didn't have super high expectations for the 130mm silo fork, but it also did a great job muting smaller rocks and roots on the trail while also providing a nice mid-stroke platform while pumping and pedaling. Geometry-wise, the relatively slack head tube angle provided plenty of confidence on the descents. The short chainstays and tight wheelbase made it super fun in the corners and when popping off sneaky side hits. Another high point for me were the wheels and tires. Funny enough, despite them being a pretty common OEM spec, I haven't spent a lot of time on the WT Trail Bosses. They did a great job balancing grip and rolling resistance in the dry, loose conditions where I was riding. I'd say they sit somewhere between a Recon and a Dissector on the Maxxis scale of treadology. If it was my personal bike, I'd probably swap that front tire out to something a bit more aggressive, but hey, for a $1,500 hardtail, not gonna complain. And the same can be said about the drivetrain. There was a decent bit of chain noise, which didn't come as a surprise given the thin chainstay protector, but shifts were consistently smooth and I never dropped a chain or ran into any mechanical hiccups during the test period. But sadly, we do need to talk about those two-piston Tektro brakes, which in my opinion is probably the only thing really holding this bike back. They did fine on slower speed cross-country trails, but I was definitely holding back on some of the faster flat-out descents. If you're looking to buy a 4130 Trail from State, I would say that upgrading to those DB8s is a must. To be honest, I wish they would have just spec'd those on the bike to begin with and maybe hiked the price up another $100 or so. Thinking back on my time on the State Bicycle Co. 4130 Trail, kind of feels like a tale of two bikes. On climbs or low-speed tech, the steel frame, dialed tires, and smooth drivetrain deliver performance far beyond what you'd expect for a $1,500 hardtail. But on high-speed descents, the underpowered brakes and lack of dropper post remind you that no, you're not on a high-end boutique hardtail. And honestly, that's okay. It is, after all, a $1,500 bike. And in some ways, it sort of seems like State shot themselves in the foot by making a frame that rides so dang well that you kind of expect the rest of the components to be on the same caliber. But again, they're not, and that's fine. But now let's go ahead and compare the 4130 Trail to what's surely going to be its biggest competitor at this $1,500 price. And that's the all-new 4th Gen Trek Roscoe 7. The Roscoe's geometry is slightly more progressive than the 4130 Trail, with a longer reach and lower standover height across all sizes. It also has a straight, uninterrupted seat tube, which will negate the seat post insertion issues I had with the State. Like the 4130 Trail, the new Roscoe is thoroughly modern when it comes to frame standards, including a BSA bottom bracket with ICG tabs, boost through axles front and rear, and a universal derailleur hanger. In terms of components, I'd say the two bikes are relatively comparable. The Roscoe does come with a dropper post, which in my opinion is a huge perk, and it gets a 10-speed Q's drivetrain that we've been very impressed with in the past, but sadly retains underpowered 2-piston brakes. It also gets a 150mm RockShox Recon fork rather than the 130mm silo. The Recon has relatively similar internals, but 32mm stanchions rather than 35, which could make for some unwanted front end flex, especially for larger riders. Having spent a lot of time on the 3rd gen Roscoe, I can say that those bikes are a ton of fun to ride. They're definitely a lot harsher than the State, which is what you'd expect when comparing an aluminum to a steel frame. I think riders that spend a lot of time riding slow speed technical trails, or marathoners who regularly go on 5+ hour rides will really benefit from a steel frame. But if you prefer shorter flow and jump trails, the difference in frame material won't be as noticeable. You might actually be better served by the increased seat post insertion on the Trek. It's also worth noting that State is a direct-to-consumer brand, which means that when you're buying from them, you're gonna purchase it from their website, and they'll ship you the bike in a box, and then you'll either put it together yourself, or you can take it to your local bike shop to have them do that. This cuts out the middleman and lowers the price, but you don't get that same bike shop experience you'd get if you were buying, say, a Trek. This means you probably won't be able to test ride it, and you won't have the expertise of a local mechanic who knows the ins and outs of your specific model. In the end, these two bikes are quite a bit different, but it's hard to peg one as being significantly better than the other. I think it really just comes down to your priorities. After spending a good bit of time on the State Bicycle Co. 4130 Trail, I think it's safe to say that it succeeded in delivering that sublime ride feel of a steel-framed hardtail at a price point that's pretty much unheard of these days. That said, they did have to cut some corners to get there, and the poor seat post insertion, underpowered brakes, and absence of a dropper post do take away from the bike's potential on the trail. In the end, I'd say the 4130 Trail is a great option for riders who prioritize comfort and compliance and don't feel like they need the newest, fanciest gadgets and gizmos bolted to their frame. Sure, the components here might not be fancy, but save for the brakes, they took everything I threw at them in stride. The second customer I'd recommend the 4130 Trail for is someone looking to do a frame-up build, because for $500, the frame set option is pretty dang hard to beat. Or maybe you're just someone like me, who really appreciates the look and ride feel of a classic steel bike, but have trouble justifying paying thousands of dollars for it. And if that's you, then you should definitely check out the link that I have down there in the description to learn more about the 4130 Trail and potentially buy one for yourself. Now, if you have any more questions, you can go ahead and leave those down there in the comments, and I'll be sure to get you an answer. Before you get out of here, appreciate it if you just hit that like button, subscribe to the 99 Spokes channel, and as always, remember that bikes are for everyone. Have fun out there.